So I posed as a seller. I didn't actually want to sell my milk, but I just wanted to find out who would approach me, and that was very surprising. Breastfeeding a stranger, a man off the internet, was like quite shocking to me, but then I had to understand that I wasn't coming from a position where that was like a financial necessity for me. For example,
Alev, you wrote this wonderful book, Cash Cow. Can you tell us just what it's about and yeah, how it felt writing it?
thanks. Yeah, it's a book about the commodification of motherhood, essentially, of parenthood as well, but specifically how women's bodies, maternal bodies, are monetized within the fertility industry. It's about the breast milk market. It's about the human egg market. It's about surrogacy globally. In the US, obviously, it's a big market, but also in less regulated, less safe countries, about altruistic versus commercial surrogacy. And it is a big departure for me as a writer. This is not my background. Bioethics and feminist subjects are actually not my background. I used to write about Turkish politics, but when I became a mother, I just became very interested in how my body had changed and how it was seen by society. So it was a personal book in a way. Like, my entry to the subject was very personal. I had an oversupply of milk with my first baby, so I wanted to donate it to a hospital milk bank. And when I was researching how to do that, I came across the commercial online breast milk market, which I didn't know existed. I was really interested in the idea that women are selling their milk online, and I wanted to know who was buying it. So I posed as a seller. Um, I didn't actually want to sell my milk, but I just wanted to find out who would approach me, and that was very surprising.
I won't, do any spoilers because I think everyone should read this. It is such a timely book for personal reasons as well that we'll get into later, and I really appreciated that you wrote it. It's
Thank you.
International Women's Day this week, and it's also Mother's Day in the UK this month. And I'm sure you didn't mean to release this book in a way that coincided with both, but I really can't help feeling how important it is today, especially in the context of conflict and violence, which completely affects women the most, especially vulnerable women. And also the political context that we're in. I think a few weeks ago we had Stephen Bartlett implying that men had a right to fertility and to sex, and that women should somehow be pliant and provide that. We've had an assault on women's legal protections, and we know that, as I said, I mean, you're connected to Turkey. I think you have roots, like family heritage roots in Turkey. I'm British Lebanese, and we know that the region's on fire, and no doubt affecting many people out there. In this context, how does it feel to be writing about the commodification of women's bodies and releasing a book like this in the current political context? It's more of a bioethics book looking at the industry itself, but can we divorce that from the politics? And yeah, where's your head at in relation to that topic and politics?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not possible to divorce the political realm from this subject, of course. I mean, what's interesting in some ways is it the market in the maternal body is a market like any other in some respects. So there just is a market value for breast milk, for example. Having said that, I was very aware when I was posing as a seller that I had never been in a financial situation which forced me to sell my breast milk, and that is just a socioeconomic stroke of luck that I have that some women don't have. So I had to suspend my judgment. So I had certain instinctive reactions to some of the things I was encountering in my research. The idea of like breastfeeding a stranger, a man off the internet, was like quite shocking to me, but then I had to understand that I wasn't coming from a position where that was like a financial necessity for me, for example. I think your question becomes really relevant when we look at surrogacy, in particular transnational surrogacy. So what I mean by that is very poor women traveling from places like Central Asia to more affluent countries which have a flourishing surrogacy market, like Northern Cyprus, for example, or Georgia or Moldova, Armenia, where they can earn an amount of money which they couldn't dream of earning in their home country. And what interested me about that was there's an obvious exploitation involved in that, well, maybe it's not obvious, but there is exploitation involved in that. Because these women, have to leave their families behind. They take on a huge amount of personal, financial, medical risk when they go and travel to become a surrogate. But at the same time, are we the best people to judge whether it's in their best interest to make that decision or not? Like, who are we to judge them for doing that? I think the line between exploitation and empowerment for these women is more blurred than people think. It's very easy to come and say, that's wrong, that should be illegal, we should put a stop to this market however we can. I do have a certain sympathy with that point of view because I can see the exploitation, I can see the dangers, obviously. But I also think that we have to bear in mind that there are financial forces at play that we can't necessarily fully understand or empathize with because we're living in such a privileged position. Well, speaking for myself, speaking for you, I think, and maybe many people listening to this, that's what really came across in my research was just like how important it is to suspend judgment when we're looking at the choices that women make about their bodies, about their families, about their income, and how they choose to sustain their families.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think what you're saying resonates with something else I was looking at a few months ago, which is on the paid organ donations, because
Yeah.
this is somewhat similar in a way. It's not quite that you're removing something from, well, with eggs, right, where you might be removing them, implanting them in someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to surrogacy, you're still paying for access to someone's body in a certain way, and for,
Yeah.
in this case, it's a more limited period of time. The UK courts and UK public opinion really turned against paid for organ donations a few decades ago. And in the context of some of my studies on ethics, we were trying to understand, disaggregate kind of the different interests there. The people who were vulnerable but informed, and also for whom 20,000, 50,000 would go a very long way for it's kind of a very minor donation, but that was banned. And there is definitely a judgment there, and you can see that a consequence of these policies is to push people into more vulnerable positions and to a less trusted medical systems and processes, and actually doctors who are maybe more willing to game the system and do that overseas
Yeah.
in countries where the legal protections are not quite as strong. It's hard not to pass judgment over the way that we use different bodies and what right we have, but at the
Yeah,
same time,
it's
as you
really
say,
difficult. I mean,
agency. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say that I looked a lot at blood donation and in particular plasma donation
Yeah.
with relation to this, because historically in Europe, we've really frowned upon paying people for their plasma, even though
Mhm.
it's really necessary for many in many medical situations. We need donated plasma, but because we don't pay for it, there's a shortage, which means we import it from the US. In the US, you do get paid for your plasma. If you look at where the plasma centers are in the US, there's a lot on the Mexican border. Like there's a lot in places where people really need the money, and it's often non-white donors who are choosing that and choosing a financial incentive. I think there's a certain amount of hypocrisy in saying we're not going to pay donors in our country, but we are going to buy it from a country that pays that. It's just passing the buck
100%.
morally. Like I don't really. So actually, things are changing now. As an EU country, you don't have to promise not to pay. You can choose to pay donors if you want to. I think most European countries still don't do it because I understand. Like it is there is a nastiness involved in sort of essentially farming people for their body parts or the bodily fluids. Like there is something really dystopian about it. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not a professor of ethics. I'm not a policymaker. I just think we should be having a conversation about it.
100%. And I think even ethicists don't really know what the answer is. Me a little bit going through the literature, a bit like it was kind of a virtue signaling. Oh, we won't pay for them over here, but it can happen somewhere else. We're going to pretend we don't see it. It's like a fake, like moral cleansing, when actually we should
Yeah.
just put it on and understand how challenging it is and do it with kindness and respect for everyone involved in a very vulnerable transaction, especially when it comes to fertility. Your point about farming people implies that it's somewhat, well, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's somewhat is new, but I was really touched by some of the stories you had of milk mothers helping each other out at times of need. And I think one of the examples you used was from Palestine, women helping one another across faith groups, obviously before, decades ago. I guess, well, before in the early 20th century, I imagine your examples
It
were
was
from.
still happening in the early 20th century. I don't know. I spoke to a woman in her 70s, maybe she'd be in her 80s now, whose grandmother, a Jewish grandmother, had breastfed an Arab boy, a baby boy, like her next door neighbor's
Yeah.
baby. So we're talking, yeah, definitely early 20th century.
Yeah.
But like as I write in the book, it's mind blowing to think of that situation in our modern
Yeah.
context in today's world. I do think there's been Palestine is an extremely striking example of a breakdown of relations between two different ethnic groups, but I think generally in like worldwide we have seen a kind of, I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say a disintegration of society, but certainly a more individualistic approach to family, perhaps, and more mistrust between individuals. I was really struck by that when I was comparing kind of the historical records I was reading and our present day.
Yeah, because it's not that, in a way, even that example of the two Palestinian families, Jewish and Arab, non-Jewish, I imagine Muslim in that case, kind of there's still an economy there. There's an expectation, I'll help you out, but you'll help me out. There, it may not be that you'll help me out today, but if I need it and I can't breast, there's still an ending. It's a social tie that it was an expectation. We've seen it in the Balkans too, across communities too. The milk mothers just helping one another out. It felt reading your book that these social ties, maybe because of the individualism and the sense that I should be the ultimate provider for everything for my child, that actually sometimes it made more sense for women to want to pay or for to enter a transaction because it was clearer, it was more understandable for women. Okay, well, you know what? The relationship ends here. The transaction is a financial one, and this is the limit of the relationship, and then we move on. And it feels like something's amiss about the quality of relationships in everyone involved in this industry, in this women's body supply chain. I think you could have, yeah, the maternal body, the global commodification of it. But then I wonder, am I catastrophizing? Because in some of the stories that you presented, there's a lot of beauty there, and you do see that there are these bonds that are retained, whether it's because of an egg donation or surrogacy or milk donation. How did you square that in your head?
I mean, again, I think it really comes down to a lack of judgment because every case is different. To take the example of a New York woman I interviewed, she's wealthy. She paid for a surrogate for her twin daughters, and she actually told me that her best friend had offered to carry those embryos for free as an act of friendship, and she turned her down because she preferred the contract of like a not anonymous but someone she hadn't met before to just carry out a service for her, which would be clear, transactional, legal representation for both sides, very kind of clean, like it's done when it's
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
I think she feared the unknown of that relationship evolving with her friend stroke surrogate. She was nervous about how that might get complicated, how it might
yeah,
complicate friendship, how it might complicate her feelings towards her children, and maybe some kind of threatening relationship between them and the friend. I don't know. She was like, I don't want that. And when she first told me, I was surprised because I thought if I ever needed a surrogate, I would want someone very close to me. I would like
yeah,
maybe like a kind of sisterly bond. Then as I continued my research and I heard, a few horror stories about kind of, yeah, altruistic surrogacy gone wrong, I understood her position a lot more. I do think being an altruistic surrogate is an incredible thing. Like I cannot imagine that level of generosity.
yeah,
Um, and when it goes well, it is so beautiful. It can go
yeah.
wrong. Um, and I think that's the case for everything. Nation, milk donation. Yeah, I don't pass judgment. I'd really try not to pass judgment on anyone I write about in the book, because everyone has their own motivations and financial needs or financial blessings or whatever it is that gives them motivation. But I'm kind of with you in a way. Like I do think that it's not a coincidence that things are becoming more commercial, that things are going towards that commercialization of the maternal body. I have roots in Turkey, and in the past, to some extent today, in certain parts of the country, particularly in the southeast, it hasn't been super uncommon to kind of share children out within the larger family. So I have a friend whose cousin grew up not realizing that his mother, who he thought was his mother, was actually his aunt, and
Oh,
she had been trying for a child and couldn't have one, and her sister had like six and was like, "Do you want my latest baby?" Just sort of, and and it was just kind of normal. It wasn't a big deal because children are sort of seen more in the collective in those kinds of community. They're sort of there to be enjoyed by everyone. They're not like property, pieces of property.
yeah.
Um, and so now, right, that just sounds like what? Like, it's my child and it's your child, and it's like they belong to us, and they're not like a collective resource.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, I think that's symptomatic of what we're talking about.
There's a really beautiful Arabic poem you just reminded me of by Gibran, and he says the opening line is أولادكم ليسوا لكم إنهم أولاد الحياة. Your children are not yours. They are the children of life. Like they're
Yeah,
they're owned by the world.
yeah.
But I think that he had a different sense than the actual physical, sharing of children. But
Well, I
interesting
don't
difference.
know. It's about societal ties, isn't it? Like when I lived in Istanbul, I was so struck by how things were allowed in terms of contact with children in the public sphere that are not allowed in the UK. So um, I remember like being on a bus, and not actually a bus, a dolmuş, which is like a kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's the same Arab countries, but like it's full when it's full, and it goes.
Yeah,
It's like a minivan, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it can
yeah.
get
I've
really
seen that.
squashed
I've never
inside.
been on one, which
Sorry.
I've never been on one.
Okay.
Mainly because I'm like, I don't want to be that tightly packed with loads of people. But yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
used to take them all the time, and I remember if there was a child and there wasn't space for the parent to sit with the child, like it's usually the mother, she would just kind of hand the child to the back row, and someone would just have the child on their lap,
Oh,
like a kind of like we were all family. And I'm not saying it in some kind of utopian way, like, but
yeah,
that would never happen in the UK. You would never hand your child to a stranger on a minivan because there wasn't enough space for them to sit with you. Maybe you were like standing at the front. So it's just kind of a different attitude. Or in security queues at airports, the security guy takes the child when the mum walks through the X-ray machine. Like, there's no taboo about touching someone else's child in public, which I think does go back to this sense. The spirit of that poem is linked to that, like this idea that, yeah, we're not proprietorial about children. Of course, we love them and they're ours. We pour everything into them, but they're not sort of totally off limit to
yeah.
anyone
They're,
else.
they're first and foremost for the world, and then you're caretakering them. Is the sense of that poem? It's a
Yeah.
really beautiful one. Uh, okay, just changing track a little bit. What really struck me reading this is that this wasn't like a kiss and tell about all the bad businesses profiting from the exploitation of women's maternal anxiety. I think is what you called it, exploitation of maternal anxiety, the fear of infertility that we all feel. And I remember a friend once told me, I don't know on what day something flicks in your mind where you're worried that you're going to just like get pregnant by just touching a guy, to fearing you're never going to get pregnant at all, whatever the circumstance.
Yeah.
uh, it does feel like a big complete flick of a switch in your mind. But you did talk a lot about your friends, your acquaintances, some of the medics you'd met. How did their experiences shape your writing of this book? I mean, you started it because of your own pregnancy, and your position with your glut of breast milk, but I just wonder how you felt handling all these very delicate stories, your friends' experiences, and they wanted something that you had, possibly, and
Mhm.
couldn't achieve it.
Yeah, it's a really sensitive subject. It's a very emotionally laden subject, infertility. And I was very aware that I've been lucky enough that I haven't been through IVF. I haven't had to go through IVF myself. But I didn't want to write the book from a position of ignorance, which meant that it was vital I talked to women and men, but primarily women, about their experiences and how they felt on the receiving end of the system, like as
Mm.
customers as well as
Mm.
patients, and that difficult kind of client-patient status that a woman has when she goes to a clinic and voluntarily freezes her eggs or um, undergoes IVF. So it was something I wanted to navigate thoroughly, but as carefully as I could. It wasn't always easy, and I was aware at certain times that I was looking in a very journalistic way at an industry with quite a cynical lens. Like you said, it's not a kiss and tell. It's not like a
Yeah.
skewering of the fertility industry, but I was keen to highlight that there are exploitative elements that people seem to have overlooked. And so, yeah, it was tricky because it's also like I wish I could have 10 pages or more for every single person I interview to really go into all the detail of their story, because there's so much context and nuance to everyone's fertility journey, but I didn't have that space. So sometimes there was a danger of like simplifying or truncating people's experiences. But like I said, I had to talk. I had to have these conversations. I had to have this first-hand experience. One of my friends in Madrid was kind enough to invite me to one of her appointments in a clinic, and so I really got to like kind of shadow her through that and her meeting with the doctor, and that felt very. It felt like privileged access, but also like, should I be here? Is just like a very private thing? I felt almost like a chaperone. It was quite strange. But yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult to navigate. I'm not sure
Yeah.
I always did it perfectly, but I tried.
Yeah, I mean, I decided it's one round of egg freezing, and I think it is way nicer to have friends there with you, or
Okay.
partners and so on, people around you supporting you, because it is private, but it's such a universal like experience. This, in my case, I haven't always been sure that I did want to become a mother, and I wanted to be able to give myself that option without feeling the pressure of kind of settling for whoever to make it to go through the process faster. And it felt, at least initially, although it got less that way, it felt initially like quite exciting. It's like, yeah, I'm doing this, and in a way empowering. Obviously, when things go to plan or they don't go to plan, your emotions are kind of a lot more all over the place. But even then, it was really nice. So I'm sure she really appreciated it, even though you were probably there with two hats. A, you're her friend, and you're also a journalist and a writer looking at this topic kind of a little bit more at a distance and writing about it.
Yeah.
I was struck by something you said at the end of the chapter about eggs. You said that looking at it, had doing this research had left you angry, and I thought it was really honest. Can you talk about why? Like, what was the anger about, or
Um,
where was your head at when you wrote?
yeah, like I said, I hadn't really been through any of the experience I was writing about, any of the kind of experiences which do often involve miscarriage, right? IVF is famously like risky
Mm,
and and doesn't always work. So I suppose, like I said, I had this cynical journalistic lens, and I was
mm,
trying to be objective and analytical about the whole thing. And I was, in the abstract, I understood that there was sort of, as I said, elements of exploitation where I do think women's desperation to become mothers or anxiety about not becoming a mother can be monetized very easily and often exploited. I do think they're sometimes not as well informed as they should be by the clinics of what everything entails and their chances of success. But I was looking at it almost like with quite a cold eye, like, because it hadn't really happened to me, any of that. Um, and then when I did experience a miscarriage, and I experienced what it's like to deal with that. In my case, my miscarriage actually had to be surgically managed in the end. So it involved NHS treatment and luckily a very kind doctor. But it made me realize how horrible that experience. You think about, what if I was experiencing this not for the first time, but maybe for like the fifth or sixth time, and I was still being expected to, continue with treatment and cough up money for something that might result in another miscarriage. And it brought home to me how precarious emotionally and physically it is for women to go through this, often alone. That's what made me angry, was like actually viscerally feeling those emotions of disappointment, grief, pain, like all these things that women go through so much. Like it's something that isn't talked about that much. It's behind the scenes of almost every fertility journey is a failed one, like a failed journey, a failed round of IVF. So it brought it home to me, and I was almost ashamed that I hadn't been angry before that point in the way that I was from then on.
I hear you. I think what makes me angry is that, I can afford to an extent to go through this and to do it for myself. And what makes me angry is the exclusion of a lot of women who may want to have families, but for whatever reason, they haven't been able to so far from our health system, which I appreciate. A lot of women listening to this, you'll be in the US, so this will be a bit alien to you, but in the UK, where we have the National Health System, National Health Service rather, we, a lot of there are lots of options for treatment for you, but there aren't many for fertility treatment unless you're supposed to need it. But I was having a conversation with the head of one very actually the head of one a hospital in the UK, in London. Yesterday, we are talking about your book over dinner. And he said, well, actually, there are lots of treatments that we give out that are not, going to be life altering, or they're necessary. They're no way as consequential as helping a woman bear a child if that's what she wants. And we haven't had an honest conversation about this. And, even to the extent of, okay, really, really hard to extend someone's life who's 87 by 1 year. Is that worth more than helping someone who's 40 start a family? Like, he was despairing because he thought there's just no room for these conversations. They're simply not being had. And he hoped that in the next few months, next few months or years, things will change. He felt optimistic. I think politically, nobody's helping have that conversation. Everyone's kind of collectively burying their head in the sand. And I am angry because it's a shame. I had an operation for a nasal deviation. Would I have rather had, an egg freezing treatment on the NHS? Absolutely.
Maybe we should all be given. Maybe we should all be given the choice. Like, this is an amount of money that the tax system has allocated for your NHS care. What do you want to spend it on? Like,
certainly we should be discussing these options. I think it's interesting that we're not, and it's bad for women. It's bad for society because actually fertility rates are down, and we need them.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can I go? Oh no, sorry, Alev, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that what scares me a little bit about the care that we get in this country, even though I am a huge fan of the NHS in general, but the sort of arbitrary nature of the decisions made by regional care boards. So they differ massively, which is what leads to what people call the NHS like postcode lottery. So you can be living on one street and you might be entitled to some help for IVF treatment, and then someone else living on the next street won't be because they fall under a different jurisdiction. And the decisions about who can and cannot receive treatment just seem so wildly different to me. Like, some care boards differentiate on the basis of BMI, or whether you're heterosexual, or whether you've tried self-funded insemination before, like whether, if you're a couple, whether one of you already has children or not, or like your ages, like all these things are just so, there's no uniformity. And maybe uniformity would not be a great thing either, but the arbitrariness of those rules seem quite cruel to me. Like
100%, yeah.
The postcode lottery is mad.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a final question from me. So, as I mentioned, I'm going through egg freezing right now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that a lot of women are not adequately informed. What should I know about this process that the doctors probably haven't told me?
Well, I should say I'm not a fertility doctor. I'm not an embryologist, and I don't know how much you have been informed by whichever clinic you've gone to. Most eggs that have been frozen have never been used, so our stats are actually not very reliable or informative. If you look at them with a broad lens, like we don't really know the quality of any particular woman's eggs. All we know, broadly speaking, is that they deteriorate with age. So you need more. The older you are, the more eggs you need to have a decent chance of a live pregnancy at the end of it, of IVF treatment. So it's a big unknown. Like, if they're giving you these stats with confidence, just treat them with certain amount of skepticism, because you have no idea what your particular fertility might be. Maybe it's amazing, maybe it's not so great. Your AMH level only tells you so much, right? So an AMH level tells, when you're tested for that in a blood test, it tells you roughly how many eggs you have left, your ovarian reserve. It doesn't tell you the quality of those eggs. Any clinic that's telling you that you're banking your fertility, or you know, investing in a future child, or anything that makes it sound like it's a solid investment, I would treat those clinics with extreme caution. The reality is we just don't know whether a woman who freezes her eggs will be successful in using them or not. They could well be, and great to have options, right? Better to do it than not do it if you're sure you want kids, or even if you think you probably do. A higher hormonal stimulation will probably result in more eggs, but not necessarily, and also not without side effects, most likely. So I don't know how your experience was. I'd be interested to know. I hope you were treated well. I hope you were treated with kindness and you were given a lot of information. Many women are not. I feel very protective of female friends of mine who go through egg freezing, just because I've heard so many horror stories, and also people who've had pretty good experiences. I wouldn't say I've talked to anyone who's had an amazing experience. There's always a toll involved, like there's a cost involved, physically, mentally, certainly financially. Think about storage costs. That's something that a lot of people don't think about. And also the websites of these clinics often advertise the cost of the freezing itself, but they don't tell you about like the storage fees, the monitoring. The meds are hugely expensive. Like, I remember looking into a quote that my friend had got, and I was checking it on the website of the clinic she went to, and then she sent me her final bill and it was like 3 times that price. So I think that's the kind of thing that makes me really angry. It's like the lack of transparency about how much it's actually going to cost when people are already committed to doing it. Way more expensive.
No, definitely. I think my experience, it's just striking in two ways. The first thing that I thought was really striking, I think, I received good care, I think is the headline there. But what I thought was really interesting is that every time you're going in for a different test, someone else sees you. And I don't know how good that is. And I also don't know how, well, certainly from medical perspective, how good it is, because they don't really know your priors.
Yeah.
But also from like a personal health perspective, I didn't want that to feel like a body on a conveyor belt. So I asked for the same doctor to see me every time, and she did. And she was wonderful. She was not the consultant who did the procedure in the end. He was, I guess, a bit more senior in the context of their practice, but she did see me every time. But I had to ask for that. So my first takeaway is ask for what you want.
Yeah, definitely advocate for what you want. That's something that I think people are scared to do, or it doesn't occur to them. I've heard so many variations of what you said, of feeling like you're on a conveyor belt, feeling like you're just a number.
Yeah.
People kind of not really knowing who you are, or what you've been through before, what tests you've had done,
Yeah.
and a lack of continuity, which I just think speaks to the shiv of female patients who are going through this.
When I asked for it to be the same person, they just did. It didn't seem like it was so hard, but it just didn't seem like it struck them to really think about that. And I guess because she was a doctor, I guess a lot of the tests could be done by someone a bit more junior, and so it's more cost effective for them to do it that way. So maybe that's also part of the calculation. But I think for me, I had very nice, healthy numbers. So I was so excited. And then at the end, it turned out that half of them were underdeveloped and probably needed a bit more time. The risk was that if we'd waited a bit, longer than the ones that were appropriately developed would might have like over matured and then become unusable effectively. I was really frustrated and disappointed by that because you go in and you're like, oh yay, I'm so excited, I'm on the front foot and I'm doing this and I'm taking control of everything and I'm really happy and like the numbers look healthy and aren't I an overachiever and isn't that exciting? And because you can't help but think somehow that it reflects on you
Yeah,
morally
yeah,
in some way, which it
yeah.
absolutely does not.
No, I know, but it gets to the heart of like your identity as a woman somehow. And
Yeah,
I heard also from the other side of things, like I talked to a consultant, a woman who worked as a consultant helping American women find cheaper treatment abroad in Europe and within the states as well. But she dealt with very high achieving professional New York women who had always achieved whatever they wanted in like
yeah,
whatever they set their mind to. They'd got the best grades at Ivy League schools, and then they'd gone on to these amazing careers, and they didn't understand how they couldn't like just fix their AMH results. They just couldn't understand how they had got a low number of eggs when they went for their retrieval. Like it was just the first time they'd failed and there was nothing they could do about it. And they were so frustrated. And so that's kind of, it sounds kind of funny, but it's also really, it's
yeah,
just a really sad reality of biology. Like that's just the
yeah.
way it is. So yeah, I hear you, and there's definitely a roller coaster, right? You felt optimistic, and then there was a disappointment. Sometimes it's the opposite, but this is why expectations have to be managed, and I think this is why perhaps clinics don't quite understand the emotional fragility, the vulnerability of women, because they think maybe, oh, it's an elective procedure. They're choosing to freeze their eggs. They have the money to do it, so I think that's where there's a danger that women are treated a bit more like consumers than like
Yeah.
patients.
Actually, it's really good to just credit to my clinic. They offer 3 counseling sessions alongside each round, so that you can get that support. And
Yeah,
I thought that was good. I haven't taken them up on it yet, but you just reminded me that I did want to go for it because it's silly not to if it's available to you and you've kind of paid for it because you
yeah,
paid for the treatment. But I also think it is necessary. And I'd add one thing as a piece of advice for anyone thinking of doing it is just make sure your friends are there at the end with a big tub of ice cream and they're ready to come over to yours and you can just watch silly movies and just relax because I think that also was so important at the end. And I just had like like constantly friends streaming in and out and we didn't necessarily talk about it. I was a bit disappointed. I didn't really want to talk about it, but it was just so lovely to just be able to pig out and
yeah.
literally I ate ice cream from a tub, which is the first time I've ever done that. Probably
Great time to start. Why
just
not?
give it to me. I'm just like, I don't
Yeah,
care.
well, I mean, it's like completing a marathon or something. Yeah, you definitely need that
Yeah,
reward, I think.
yeah, that's really what it felt like. Both a reward and a bit of a like, oh wow, this is a nice new low, but I'm gonna enjoy it. But
Yeah,
thank you so much, Alev. This is such a fun conversation.
thank
Again, like
you.
I really love this book. I appreciate you that you wrote it, and at least for me, it was incredibly timely. I know a lot of women will also really enjoy reading it. Where can we buy it? And if you're in the States, can you also buy? Is it situation?
So yeah, it's available on audio and Kindle if you're outside of the UK. I think you can buy it in certain like in physical form in certain Amazon locations. I'm not sure. And then it's coming out in the US on the 13th of October.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, if you're in the UK or Europe, I guess. I mean, I hate to promote Amazon, but probably that is the easiest place, or all good bookshops in the UK.
Yeah, or you can pre-order it, I guess, in the US.
Yeah,
You can probably
exactly.
pre-order. We'll send over the links. Thank you so
Okay,
much for your
thank
time.
you.
Really
Thank you
fun
very
chatting.
much.
Speak to you later.
Bye.